On today's episode of 100 Huntley Street, we're talking about the joy of rediscovering something or someone you thought you'd lost. We'll also shed light on an unexpected but urgent issue, human trafficking right here in Canada. But as always, we're here to bring you the faith and hope you need, and it all starts right now.
Welcome to 100 Huntley Street, Canada's home for hope. We're so glad you joined us, and we have a hopeful story today. So Morgan Perigo, the night before his 83rd birthday, finds something in the mail. That's amazing. Do you know what it is?
Well, it's all about things being returned to you that you thought you lost. It's a really cool story.
Okay, so freediver Alex Davis is diving in Barbados, and he's using a metal detector, and he finds a ring. And he recognizes that it's a class ring, and it has initials on it and the year. And he Googles it, finds out what it is, sends it to the alumni department of McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and they actually figure out who it belonged to.
That's crazy.
So it's Morgan Perigo. It's 47 years since he lost it. Okay, he was swimming with his wife and kids in, I don't know, like 1977. And he went to grab his son, and a wave came and took the ring.
That happens.
He looked everywhere for it and couldn't find it. But Joe, like, what are the chances that this ring is still like there? When you think of waves and years,
and buried under sand.
Like, I think it would be in Japan by now.
Well, the odds of finding it are one thing, but the fact that the guy knew that there was value in it, instead of pawning it or something, he said, "I'm going to find out who owns this." So that's really cool.
And that McMaster helped him to find the guy.
Yeah.
And he's 83 now, so they actually were able to track down his address. Obviously, he kept in touch, or however they found him. But he gets contacted about it, and he absolutely can't believe it.
Well, that's pretty cool.
And then that it comes right on his birthday, like the night before his birthday. Come on.
Well, has that ever happened to you? Maybe you thought you lost something and then it came back?
Well, not a ring and not in the water. I once had my purse stolen, and I never thought that I would ever see it again. And the police actually found it in a stream or something, but it was all degraded because it had been in the stream for a while. But it was still very random to have it stolen and then found.
Well, that's nice.
Joe, have you... Okay, I can see that you want me to ask you. So, Joe, have you ever lost something that you thought was gone forever?
Well, funny you should mention. Yes. If you know me, we have moved a lot in our marriage, Karen and I. And so this last move, I was going through some boxes because we have to downsize because we have a smaller home, smaller space. And I found this box filled with these magazines called Heaven's Metal. I want you to look at the hair on this. Look at this. We have Guardian,
nice.
We have Deliverance, Barren Cross, we have Striper, of course, Tourniquet. Now, you got to remember, in the 80s, we didn't have the internet, right? So this is how we found out about our Christian music. And so often, by the time we would get to Canada, they would list the dates of the concerts in here, but by the time it got to us, the concerts had already passed.
Oh, that's so sad, Joe. What I want to know is, did you have hair like this?
Not quite, but I really wish I did. But there's something really amazing about finding something you thought you'd lost. And there's the parable, in the Bible about a woman who lost some coins, and she lights a lamp and she sweeps the whole house, and she finally finds it. And she rejoices because there's something beautiful about finding something that you thought was lost. And speaking of which, we thought we were lost, but God's love has brought us back. And that can bring us a lot of joy. And we have another reason to rejoice because best-selling author Anne Voskamp is here. Let's listen in.
Friends, do you know the incredible story of a man named Hudson Taylor? A shy man whose faithful work sharing the gospel in China in the 1800s led to the conversion of 125,000 Chinese Christians. But in one single summer, Hudson Taylor lost not one, but two of his children. And then he lost his wife. When asked how he navigated through such disorienting loss, Taylor said he had this practice he called, quote, a continuous habit of soul, end quote, that kept him close to the healing heart of God. Do you have a continuous habit of soul that keeps your heart close to God's heart? For me, my own continuous habit of soul, continuous habit of mind, is sacred prayer. Sacred being an acronym. which emerge from my study of God's people and their exodus out of Egypt. Sacred, that acronym is stillness, S, stillness to know God. A, attentiveness to hear God. C, cruciformity, to surrender to God. R, revelation, to see God. And then E, examine, to return to God. And then D, doxology, to thank God. Sacred prayer with a pen. And like God's people, caught between the Red Sea and the Egyptians coming at them, like they experienced a way through, sacred prayer is a way of life, a way of being that parts all kinds of impossible Red Seas and makes a way to intimate communion with God, who is our promised land. A Christian psychiatrist wrote to me a note that in all of her more than 4 decades, 40 years of working toward wholeness with countless clients, she has not found a set of personal guideposts more helpful for genuine life transformation than this committing to the daily acronym of sacred prayer as a continuous habit of soul. So here, in this moment, wherever you are, you don't have to have it all together. You simply get to let the Father, Son, and Spirit come together around you. This is where you can begin. The S of sacred, stillness. The way to always begin anything is to begin to still everything. Stillness is your strength. In a wild, wearying world, this is the realest reality. The only way to still stay standing is to make time to stand still. As a theologian of old, F.B. Meyer wrote, quote, "We must cultivate the habit of stillness in our lives if we would detect and know God," end quote, which is exactly what we read in the Psalms. Be still and know God. This matters, friends. No stillness, no God. But if we know stillness, we come to know God. To practice stillness is to practice defiantly trusting in prayer, just as Hudson Taylor did. You can still and trust that God is still moving, working all things into good. Stilled hearts still see God.
This month, as our thanks for your ministry support of Crossroads in 100 Huntley Street, we're excited to offer the book Sacred Prayer, 90 Days of Deeper Intimacy with God by beloved Canadian author Anne Voskamp.
True prayer isn't about changing God's mind, but about finding God's heart and letting His heart change our minds.
Drawing from her own intimate walk with God, Anne shares the profound yet simple sacred method of prayer. 6 steps that open the door to genuine communication with our Creator.
Through these pages, you'll discover how to transform anxiety into peace, turn routine into revelation, and make each prayer an intimate conversation with the one who loves you most.
With a gift of $40 or more, or when you become a new monthly partner, request your copy. Call 1-800-265-3100 or visit crossroads.ca/prayer.
You know, one of the hardest things for us to do in today's world is to be still. We live in a culture of noise. Our phones are always buzzing, notifications are popping up, and silence can feel awkward. But in Psalm 46:10, God says, "Be still and know that I am God." So why stillness? Because stillness creates space for God to speak. You see, prayer isn't just about us talking, it's about listening. And Elijah, the prophet, he learns this firsthand in 1 Kings 19. You know, God didn't speak through the wind, the earthquake, or through the fire, but through a still, small voice. And that means if we're constantly filling up the silence, we might even drown out God's direction for our lives. So if you've been struggling to hear God, maybe it's time to stop talking and start listening. Find a quiet place, remove the distractions, and let Him speak into the stillness. Spend time with God. You know, there's something else that we need to spend some time, talking about, and that's human trafficking. It's not just a problem in a far-off place. It's happening right here in our own neighborhoods. And it's not what most people imagine. A lot of the time, it starts with a relationship, someone gaining trust, making promises, and then trapping a person in a nightmare that they never saw coming. This is real, and as believers, we have to pay attention. Proverbs 31:8, we're told to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. That means praying, but that also means being aware, educating ourselves, and stepping in when we see something that's not right. And now for more on this, here's Lara with her guest.
Joining me now for an important update on the critical moral issue of human trafficking in Canada is Derek Ross, Executive Director and General Counsel of Christian Legal Fellowship. Thank you for being with us today, Derek.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're so honored to have you join us and to give us insight on this very important issue. In the landscape of Canada, people might not think human trafficking is a prevalent issue here. They might not actually understand what human trafficking looks like in our nation. So can you tell us a bit more about this issue in Canada and what does it look like as it takes hold of our people and our nation?
For sure. Well, and as you said, there is a lot of misconception and confusion about what human trafficking is and what it looks like. A lot of us associate it with forced abductions and confining people and imprisoning them and transporting them internationally, and certainly that does happen, although that's more what we would describe as human smuggling. When we talk about human trafficking, what we're talking about and what the criminal code is targeting is coercing or controlling another person's movements to try to exploit them for some purpose, often for forced labor or in relation to the sex trade. And as you mentioned, this is a concern here in Canada. This isn't just an international issue. The federal government has, since 2012, started collecting a bit more data and statistics about crimes related to human trafficking in Canada. And since 2012, there have been almost 4,000 police-reported incidents of human trafficking in Canada. And that has involved over 3,000 individual victims of people in Canada who have been victims of human trafficking. So it's a big concern, and it's something that's happening right within our borders.
It certainly is. And some of the statistics are so alarming. 96% of people trafficked in Canada are women and girls, and they're often experiencing sex trafficking. When you think about the danger and the reality that marginalized women and young girls who are often coming from really difficult backgrounds, difficult life experiences, and being preyed upon to go into sex trafficking, not even understanding what's actually unfolding around them in those moments. What are some of the legal issues you see unfolding in Canada right now connected to human trafficking and sex trafficking?
Well, there's a lot of issues, and one of the big issues is that human trafficking can sometimes be difficult to detect because it isn't always super obvious that someone has been a victim of this type of exploitation, precisely because it's often psychological and emotional manipulation and coercion. So what often happens is an individual might be specifically targeted, even by someone that they know, who is reaching out with the pretense of caring about them, sometimes pretending to want to have a romantic relationship with them. And so there's even a name for this. They call it the boyfriend method, because the trafficker pretends to be a person's boyfriend, but is then lavishing gifts on them, but then making that targeted person feel indebted to repay those gifts. And feeling pressured to do certain things that they don't really want to do to earn their trafficker's love or affection. Sometimes they're being supplied with drugs and the trafficker is relying on that dependency. And then the individual is in a very vulnerable position where they feel trapped. And they might not be physically trapped, but they're psychologically and emotionally abused and manipulated and being forced to do things they don't want to do and feel they have no choice but to do them. And unfortunately, that's often in connection with the sex trade.
It's interesting, Derek. I think back to many years ago when I was a youth pastor, and there was a young girl who came to me and literally described the experience of being groomed by someone who pretended to be her boyfriend and got her into sex trafficking. And so what you're describing is very real, and we need to be on the lookout and be aware and how to protect those in our society that would be preyed upon for this kind of thing. Something that we see happening are the laws in Canada. There are different court cases coming forward, cases connected to the Supreme Court of Canada, which Christian Legal Fellowship you've been working on. Can you tell our viewers a bit about what's happening in the legal landscape connected to human trafficking and sex trafficking in Canada?
For sure. And so it's important for people to recognize that there are laws that exist specifically to combat this type of exploitation. It is a crime to engage in human trafficking in Canada, but because it's difficult to detect, it's also important, and our government has taken steps to target not just trafficking per se, but the sorts of conditions that create a demand for human trafficking. And in Canada, one of the biggest demands for human trafficking is the sex trade. And so what Parliament has done is said that in order to eliminate human trafficking, we want to eliminate the demand that objectifies and commodifies the bodies of women and girls and treats them as something that can be purchased and bought and sold. And so what Parliament has done is passed a piece of legislation called the Protection of Exploited Communities and Persons Act, PSEPA. And it basically makes it a crime to purchase sexual services from another person. And it also makes it a crime to profit from the prostitution of another person. That law, though, is being constitutionally challenged by individuals who have been charged under the law. They argue that it limits the freedom of people who might want to voluntarily participate in prostitution. But some courts have already recognized that that's a very difficult distinction. The Ontario Superior Court recently concluded that many, if not a majority, of women and girls in prostitution are there as a result of manipulation or coercion or even trafficking, and that there's a clear link between sex trafficking and the sex trade in Canada. So at the Supreme Court of Canada, Christian Legal Fellowship will be arguing that this law is important and that it is not a violation of charter rights. It actually protects the charter rights of those who rely on its protection in order to be free from this type of exploitation.
Because essentially lifting that law will allow those who are perpetrators of pursuing, sex acts, it would allow them to not be prosecuted for that.
That's one of the concerns.
Right?
Now, the counter argument is that they could be charged under other provisions of the criminal code. But again, what Parliament has said is that prostitution as a system is inherently exploitative.
Of women often, too.
Particularly of women and girls. Yeah. And I should say, too, of those statistics that we mentioned earlier, those 3,000 victims, the statistics reveal that 1 in 4 of those are under the age of 18. So 1 in 4 victims are children of human trafficking in Canada.
Well, thank you, Derek, for what Christian Legal Fellowship is doing to press into this very important issue and to protect Canadians by, advocating that this law is not changed at the level of the Supreme Court of Canada. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And it's a privilege. And that's the beauty of our country, is that we can participate in the democratic process and appear before courts and argue on behalf of those who have been marginalized.
Yes. And Derek, for our viewers watching right now, what can they do to help support this advocacy work that CLF is doing?
For sure. Well, would encourage them to check out our website, christianlegalfellowship.org. We have a lot of information about these issues, to consider supporting our work and praying for our work. And I would say as well, for those maybe that are concerned that someone they know or love might be a victim of human trafficking, there are resources for them as well. There's a hotline, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, that people can call for support, to help individuals who might feel trapped, to know that they aren't trapped. There's hope for them, and that there are opportunities for them to escape these types of conditions.
Yes, and we need to be praying for that for those
Absolutely.
who are trapped in that situation within Canada. Derek, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for all you do for God's purposes for this nation.
Thank you for having me, Lara.
Well, the issue of human trafficking and sexual exploitation in Canada is such a pressing concern, and we ask that you would put it on your prayer list, along with the specific case that Derek is working on connected to the Supreme Court of Canada. And if you are a victim of human trafficking and you need help, please call this confidential and toll-free number 1-833-900-1010.
Join Crossroads in prayer for our nation of Canada. Together, let's invite God to ignite hope and renew lives coast to coast. Our prayer guide will equip you, your family, and your church. Get your free resource now at crossroads.ca.
Joining me now to talk about a new initiative at Crossroads that I believe could transform the spiritual landscape of Canada.
Over the past 45 years, we have answered over 14 million prayer calls.
The fact that they can speak to someone heart to heart makes all the difference in the world. We hear stories about transformation every day.
We built a state-of-the-art platform that allows churches, Christian organizations, ministries have their own 24/7 prayer line where they can support people in their community in their time of need.
That two-way connection is what makes the difference between them being on a precipice and going over that precipice and finding a new hope and a new lease of life through our prayer lines. If you care about prayer and prayer revival in our nation as we do, visit the Crossroads website and donate to Anyone Pray.
Well, I just love the fact that we're expanding our prayer center. And I think, if you belong to a church or an organization that could use a 24/7 prayer line, we would love for you to investigate this a little bit further. You can go to anyonePray.com and just find out more. And honestly, I think what Michelle said there about how, has there ever been a time it feels like that we could use prayer more as a nation, as a world,
100%.
than right now?
Well, that's really cool to find that out. And I want to find out something about you.
Oh, should I be worried?
No. Did you ever do Bible quizzes as a child? Was that a thing in your home? Because I didn't grow up in a Christian home, so I never had that.
Yes, my dad used to quiz us on the books of the Bible, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. We'd have to go through the Old and the New Testament, and he wanted to make sure that we knew it, and then verses and breakfast time. Always in breakfast, he would quiz us. Yeah, crazy, right?
Okay, well, hey, that's good that you got the Bible in you. Well, now we have a question for all of you. And it's this: what did Jesus say was the one quality that would cause people to know that we were his followers? I think I know the answer to that.
Do you? But we're not going to tell people, right?
No.
We're going to let you guess. So think D, 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 D. Okay, you actually let me do the whole thing. I was waiting for you to sing
I wasn't
along.
going to stop you. Well, you had a few seconds to guess, but you know what? Author and pastor Daniel M., he's going to tell us the answer.
In Mark chapter 8, I love the interaction that Jesus has with his disciples because of the two questions he asks them. Here, let me read it for us. Jesus went out with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the road he asked his disciples, this is the first question, who do people say that I am? They answered him, John the Baptist, others, Elijah, still others, one of the prophets. But you, he asked them, second question, who do you say that I am? And Peter answered him, you are the Messiah. In this passage, we see that the first question is, who do people say that I am? Right? Jesus asks his disciples, and I'm curious with the same question, if I were to ask the people around you that same question, what would they say? Hey, who do people say that you are? How would they respond to that? How would people describe you? Would they describe you by your ethnicity? Who do people say that Daniel is? Well, he's Korean. He likes snowboarding. He likes playing golf. He drives this car. He lives in this neighborhood. He has 3 kids, right? If I were to ask the people around you about you, who do people say that you are? How would they describe you? When we look at what it means to be a follower of Jesus, unless people describe us first and foremost through the love and about the love that we have for them and the love that we have for God, then what are we doing in our relationships with them? If the people that we live, work, study, and play with only know about our interests and our ethnicities and our families, but they don't know how much we love God, and if they don't feel the love that we have for them, how are we being witnesses for Christ? When people asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? He said to love God and to love others. Right? To love God and to love others. And when we think about our lives, if we are not known by our love for Jesus, if we are not known by our love for others, where we are praying for them, where we are serving them, where we are spending time with them, where we are meeting their needs, not because we're nice people, but because because God wants to extend his love to them. He wants to share his life with them by us sharing our lives with them. If we aren't living in that way, what are we doing as followers of Jesus?
Oh, good question, Daniel. So we know the answer. It is love.
That's right. Love.
It is love.
They will know.
That's how they'll know. Well, Joe, I want to ask you now a question to learn a little more about you.
Sure.
So I hear that you're launching this new blog, 66 Books of the Bible for 66 Days. What is that all about?
Yeah, so it's called Messianic Moments, and it's finding Jesus in every book of the Bible. And I actually launched it on February 14th, and it's going to go right through till April 20th, which is Easter Sunday morning. So basically, there's a devotional that's going to go live every morning at 7 a.m. Just go to like joeamaral.org/blog, and every day there'll be a new post there. And what I did a little bit of research over the holidays because I found myself kind of, not having a lot to do, and I really wanted to do something new for this new year, and I wanted to spend more time in the Word of God. And it was interesting. I found that researchers said that it takes 66 days to form like a lifelong habit. Some lower, some higher, but generally 66. They said if you go to the gym every day for 66 days, that's your thing. If you stay on the sofa for 66 days and watch TV, that's your thing.
Oh.
Yeah, I said 66. Well, there's 66 books of the Bible.
That's right.
That's a really interesting coincidence. And so I said, it would be really cool to go through every book in the Scripture in the Old Testament, find Jesus in every book of the Old Testament, how he was concealed, and then in the New Testament, look at how he was revealed, how he fulfilled those prophecies.
Wow.
So Messianic Moment is my attempt to help people in Canada, all around the world, spend time every day. It'll take you 5 to 7 minutes to do a devotional. You can go deeper, you can take longer. I have lots of supplemental scriptures, but it's just a way of getting you in that habit.
That's so good. And, you think about, Jesus in the New Testament, easy to find. What about the Old Testament, though? Like, is he
Everywhere.
in every book?
Everywhere.
What's one book that you found that you were like, that was a little harder to find him?
Well, actually, I'm gonna go the opposite. The one that really surprised me the most were the Psalms, because the Psalms talks about how he would be crucified, through the heel and the time of day. There was so much specificity in these Old Testament prophecies written thousands of years by people who had never met Jesus, and I found it absolutely just incredible. Jesus really is concealed and then revealed in every book of the Bible. I really saw that.
I love how that strengthens our faith as well when we do that research. And I got to grab this because this is a new book coming out in May that relates to this. What's it about? God of Gods.
Yeah, so on May 1st, God of Gods is coming out. I love this. This is I think it's my 7th book. And this is inspired by my last trip to Greece. I was walking through all the ruins of the cities. Here's the temple of Apollo. Here's the temple of Aphrodite. Here's the temple of Zeus. Oh, there's Mount Olympus where all the gods used to live, and all this kind of crazy mythology. And then Paul would say, your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And I began to think about how much mythology had infiltrated and permeated the culture that the Apostle Paul, Jesus, and the early church were a part of. And I started to look into the mythology of the Greeks, and I found something really, really fascinating. That there were a lot of things that people believed that the Greek gods would do, and then Jesus comes along and does them, and he moves it from myth to reality. They believed that there was a god named Poseidon who would control the sea, and Jesus would speak to the waves and say, "Peace, be still."
Wow.
And they would say, "Who is this man that even the waves obey him? We've heard, but now we've seen." And so God of Gods is a look at how he is above every god, real or perceived. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you on May 1st.
I think you're a little excited. I love it.
I am. Thanks
So
for
good.
joining us. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I could have.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads, a supporter-funded nonprofit organization and member of the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. Thanks to faithful people like you, we are able to continue producing 100 Huntley Street. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R4M2, or visit crossroads.ca to learn more about our programs.